You think they're cold. You think they're distant. But what if I told you that avoidants don't attach like the rest of us? What if the very things you think mean they're pulling away are actually signs they're holding on? Let's be real. Loving an avoidant partner can feel like standing in front of a locked door, holding a key that doesn't quite fit. You show up, you're present, you're consistent, and in return, silence, withdrawal, emotional space. But there's something deeper going on, because when an avoidant starts to attach to someone, it never looks like a movie scene. It's quiet, subtle, often misunderstood. But once you recognize the signs, I mean truly recognize them, everything begins to shift. You stop personalizing their space, you stop overanalyzing the gaps, and most importantly, you finally know where you stand. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to walk away knowing the 6 unmistakable signs that an avoidant has chosen you. Not just tolerated you, not just liked you, attached to you. And that changes everything. Avoidant partners aren't the type to cling. They don't beg, they don't show up at your door crying at 2 a.m. with flowers and apologies. In fact, when things get tense, when emotions rise, or when intimacy starts to feel too heavy, their instinct is to retreat, to disappear, to get quiet. Not because they don't care, but because the moment intimacy starts to feel real, their fear of losing control kicks in. So they do what they've always done. They pull back into the shell that's protected them for years. And that's where most people get it wrong. They interpret that distance as indifference. But what if it isn't? What if the real sign of attachment isn't whether they leave, but whether they choose to come back? Here's what most people don't realize about avoidant attachment. It's not that they don't form bonds, it's that they form them carefully, and often in ways that even they don't understand. Love for them isn't a wave they ride. It's a current they're afraid of being swept away by. So when they begin to feel something real, their first instinct isn't to hold on tighter. It's to back away, observe from a distance, and test whether the connection is a threat or a sanctuary. And yet, even when they distance themselves, if you matter, they come back. Not because they need attention, not because you reached out first, but because something in them recognizes safety in you. That return, it's not a routine, it's a choice, a quiet, hesitant, often clumsy choice, but a choice nonetheless. They won't always say, "I missed you." In fact, don't expect grand gestures or poetic confessions. You'll know they're back when they send you a random message about something mundane. "Hey, I just passed that bakery you love." Or, "Did you watch that show you mentioned?" It's coded, it's small, but it's them reaching out, feeling out if the door is still open. Avoidants don't test your patience to be cruel. They test it to see if you're real, if you'll abandon them like they've been abandoned before, if you'll punish them for their fear. And when you don't, when you stay grounded, calm, and clear, something miraculous starts to happen. They come back more frequently. The gaps shrink. The silence softens, and eventually they stop running as far. But here's the key. They don't come back out of convenience. In fact, being close to someone is deeply inconvenient for an avoidant. It disrupts their routines, their independence, their deeply ingrained habits of self-protection. So when they return, it's not because they're bored. It's not because they're lonely. It's because somewhere deep inside, they've started to see you as part of their emotional home. They begin to feel safer in your presence than in their solitude. And that shift doesn't happen casually. It takes time. It takes consistency. It takes you showing up again and again as someone who doesn't shame their need for space, but also doesn't collapse your needs to keep them. When they come back, even after the 100th time of pulling away, what they're really saying is, "I still choose you, even when my fear tells me not to." And that's not small. That's monumental. Because for someone whose entire nervous system screams for escape when intimacy gets close, Coming back isn't just a behavioral loop. It's an act of vulnerability, of trust, of growth. It may not look like the love you're used to. It may not match your idea of what romance is supposed to be, but it's love in their language. It's love with its armor still halfway on. It's love laced with fear, but love nonetheless. They don't return out of habit. Habits are easy. Habits are automatic. Habits don't involve risking rejection or confronting shame. No, when an avoidant returns, it's a deliberate, if silent, override of their survival instincts. They are choosing closeness, choosing contact, choosing the very thing that terrifies them the most. And that should tell you everything you need to know about how deep the connection runs. You don't need fireworks and dramatic speeches to prove love. Sometimes all you need is to recognize the courage it takes for someone with a walled-up heart to take even one step toward yours. Avoidants are masters of the mask. They've spent years, often decades, crafting a version of themselves that looks composed, capable, and emotionally untouchable. They've learned how to survive by staying behind the curtain, by managing how much of themselves the world gets to see. To the outside world, they're independent, self-reliant, and often even aloof. But what most people don't see, what you only discover if they've truly started to attach, is that underneath all that calm is a person who is terrified of being truly seen. Not because they don't want to be loved, but because they've been trained by life or by trauma to believe that love is conditional, that if someone sees the real them, the messy, insecure, imperfect, anxious, or angry them, they'll walk away. So they hide, and they hide well. But the moment you start to see cracks in that armor, the moment they let you witness not just their accomplishments, but their vulnerabilities, that's when something is shifting. That's when you know you're no longer standing outside their walls. You've been invited in, quietly, cautiously, but it's an invitation nonetheless. They won't say, "I trust you." They won't spell it out, but they'll show it in the most subtle human ways. You'll hear it in the way they talk about a fear they've never told anyone. You'll see it in the way they admit they didn't handle something well. You'll feel it when they let their guard down and show you the side of them that isn't polished, isn't proud, and definitely isn't picture perfect. Most avoidants live in a constant state of performance, not for applause, but for protection. They learned early on that strength earns safety, that being needy, vulnerable, or emotional wasn't safe. So they learned to shut it all down, to compartmentalize, to act like they didn't care when they did, to act fine when they were falling apart. But when you become the person who sees behind the performance, that's not an accident. That's not weakness. That's intentional. That's a risk they're taking, because showing you their imperfections isn't just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. It means gambling with the thing they fear most, rejection. And if they let you in and you mock, minimize, or misunderstand that part of them, it confirms their deepest belief, that it's safer to be alone than it is to be known. But when they start opening up, when they talk about their insecurities, their guilt, their doubts, they're handing you something sacred. Their shame doesn't come out in a flood. It leaks in small, delicate drops. You might catch it in the way they criticize themselves in passing. "I always mess that up," or "I'm just not good at relationships." It won't be a dramatic reveal. It'll be a quiet truth, softly spoken, while they're half looking away, as if they're testing to see if you'll flinch. And your reaction in that moment matters more than you know, because avoidants aren't scanning for advice. They're scanning for safety. They're watching to see if you'll hold their imperfections with compassion, or if you'll confirm the script they've always believed, that if someone sees the whole them, it's too much. When an avoidant lets you see their imperfections, it's not because they're falling apart. It's because they're finally starting to trust that they don't have to be perfect to be loved. And that's the kind of shift that can heal a lifetime of emotional isolation. You might start to notice them telling you when they're anxious. They might admit they don't have the answers. They might even tell you when they're scared they're going to lose you. And for someone who's built a fortress around their heart, That level of vulnerability is monumental. It's not weakness. It's a form of intimacy that takes more courage than most people ever realize. And sometimes it looks messy. They might get defensive when you see their flaws. They might lash out or withdraw when they feel exposed. But that reaction is fear talking, not rejection. It's them learning, often in real time, how to be seen and still feel safe. And if you can hold space in that moment, if you can be present without judgment, steady without control, you become something they've rarely had, a person who doesn't require them to be perfect in order to be loved. Avoidants hate the feeling of needing anyone. It terrifies them, not because they don't feel connection, but because needing someone threatens the very foundation of how they protect themselves, by staying in control, by staying detached, by convincing themselves they're fine alone. But jealousy? That's the crack in the wall. It's the feeling they don't invite, don't welcome, and definitely don't admit. They feel it, deeply, often viscerally, but it shows up sideways. They won't say, "I'm jealous." They won't even recognize that word in their vocabulary. Instead, it comes out in sarcasm, passive comments, withdrawal, or even sudden coldness you can't explain. It sneaks in when you're talking about a friend, a coworker, a night out that didn't include them. They'll act indifferent, maybe even roll their eyes, but what's really happening is something deeper. They feel threatened, and they don't know how to name it. What makes this so complicated is that avoidants don't feel entitled to jealousy. To them, it feels weak, immature, even dangerous. So instead of owning it, they suppress it. But suppression doesn't erase emotion. It just reroutes it. And so it shows up in confusion. One minute they're laughing with you, the next they're emotionally checked out. One day they're warm and receptive, the next they're distant and cool. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't cross any boundaries. But what you did do was trigger something they don't want to feel. That fear of being replaced, that feeling of competition, that ache of knowing someone else could have access to you, and they might lose their spot without ever being given the words to fight for it. The truth is, when an avoidant gets jealous, it reveals something huge. They care, deeply, more than they're ready to admit. Jealousy in their world is an involuntary confession, a raw, unfiltered truth leaking out through cracks in the emotional armor. It's their subconscious screaming, "You matter to me," even as their mouth says, "I don't care." And because avoidants are allergic to emotional vulnerability, jealousy doesn't come with a plea to stay. It comes with a push. They might get irritated at things they would usually ignore. They might accuse you of being too close to someone. They might even pretend they don't like your friends or question your judgment, not because they genuinely think less of you, but because it gives them a sense of control over something they feel powerless against. But under the sarcasm and passive remarks is a quiet panic, an old wound, because most avoidants didn't learn how to process emotions like jealousy. They learned to shut them down, to pretend they weren't there, to act unbothered. They built their identity on emotional independence, on not needing anyone, and so the moment they feel possessiveness, envy, or longing, their instinct isn't to talk it out, it's to run from it. And you'll feel that in the room. A conversation suddenly shifts. The energy drops. Their body tenses. They'll either shut down or lash out, and you'll be left wondering what just happened. That's jealousy. That's fear. That's them protecting something they don't even feel entitled to claim. But if you pay close attention, if you can look past the surface, you'll start to see the pattern. They listen more intently when you talk about someone else. They get weirdly quiet when you mention an ex. They ask casual questions that don't feel casual at all. Do you still talk to them? Or, so what's the deal with that guy, girl? It's not curiosity. It's comparison. It's them trying to locate their place in your life without exposing how much they actually care. And it's heartbreaking in a way, because instead of expressing that fear, they bury it, and sometimes end up punishing you emotionally for making them feel something they're not equipped to handle. The thing about avoidant jealousy is that it's never about control. It's not possessive in the traditional sense. It's protective, self-protective. It's the fear of being discarded, of being unchosen, of being close enough to want someone, but too guarded to believe they're truly wanted back. That's why they'd rather act like they don't care than risk being vulnerable. To them, vulnerability equals exposure, and exposure feels like danger. So when they get jealous, they don't name it. They hide it. But in that hiding, in that emotional swirl beneath the surface, is the truth they won't say out loud. They've already started to attach. And the thought of losing you, of being replaced, feels far more painful than they'll ever admit out loud. With avoidance, you're never going to get the textbook version of love. They're not the ones writing long love letters, shouting their feelings from rooftops, or texting you good morning every day without fail. Their love doesn't move in straight lines. It flickers, it hides, it hesitates, it pauses, and then stumbles forward again. And if you don't understand the wiring of an avoidant, you'll miss the meaning buried in the mess. You'll think they're being inconsistent because they're unsure about you. You'll assume they're hot and cold because they're playing games. But what's actually happening is this. They are trying, truly trying, to show up for you in the only way they know how. It's not perfect. It's not daily. It's not always clear, but it's real. It's vulnerable. And for them, every small effort is a quiet act of courage. Avoidants are always scanning for emotional safety, and it takes time, real time, for them to believe that closeness doesn't equal danger, that you won't consume them, that you won't abandon them, that love doesn't have to mean losing themselves. And in that waiting room of internal fear, their nervous system gets stuck in a tug of war. One part of them wants to reach out, to connect, to share something real. The other part is still clutching the door handle, preparing to run. That's why you'll get the random check-in text at 11:42 p.m. or the sudden gesture that seems to come out of nowhere. They remembered your favorite drink. They offered to help with something you didn't expect. They sent a song that reminded them of you. These aren't random. They're signals, small but loaded. Signs that despite everything in them screaming to stay protected, they're inching towards you. You see, avoidants don't move in floods. They move in drops. And if you measure their love using traditional standards, constant communication, steady affection, predictable availability, you'll end up feeling neglected, or worse, unloved. But if you start to see their patterns not as dysfunction, but as an emotional dialect they're still learning, everything shifts. That time they looked at you with softness when they thought you weren't looking, that was real. That moment they opened up about their past, even if it was just a single sentence, that was big. That time they drove out of their way to drop something off for you without making a big deal out of it, that was their version of I care about you. They just didn't know how to say it out loud. It's easy to dismiss these moments when you're aching for more, when your heart craves consistency and their rhythm feels like a dance you can't follow. You want more presence, more certainty, more proof. But with an avoidant, the proof lives in the subtle details, the way they start to include you in their world, not with grand announcements, but with quiet allowance. They mention you to a friend. They let you see their routine. They start to tell you what stresses them out or what makes them feel small, even if they do it with a joke or in passing. You have to listen with your heart, not just your ears, because avoidants rarely say what they mean directly. Their love leaks out the sides, not through the front door. And yes, it's inconsistent. Not because you don't matter, but because they're battling a storm of internal resistance. Some days they feel open and safe and relaxed. Other days, one emotional trigger or memory can send them into lockdown, even if it has nothing to do with you. They've been wired to believe that closeness equals loss of control, that love ends in pain, that showing up too much means becoming vulnerable, and becoming vulnerable means being exposed. And being exposed has always meant one thing: hurt. So when they show up, even in these uneven waves, what they're really doing is learning how to be human in front of someone without the full armor. That's not inconsistency. That's growth in real time. You might not always feel the security you crave in those moments. You might question if it's enough. You might even think you're imagining the care. But if you slow down, if you look closer, if you start recognizing the difference between chaos and discomfort, you'll see what's happening. They're choosing to stay connected, even when every muscle in their body is telling them to pull away. And that choice, made over and over again, even imperfectly, is how avoidants love. Not in perfection, not in predictability, but in small, meaningful ways that say more than words ever could. With avoidance, you rarely get verbal declarations. You don't always hear the words you long for, the "I miss you," the "I love you," the "I'm scared of losing you." Instead, you feel their love through subtleties, shadows of emotion, flashes of tenderness, changes so gradual and quiet that if you blink, you might miss them. One of the most telling and misunderstood signs that an avoidant is growing attached is that they begin to mirror you, not intentionally, not manipulatively, but instinctively, unconsciously. They begin to echo your energy, adopt your habits, reflect your words, and synchronize with your presence. And this is not mimicry. This is emotional resonance. It's the kind of intimacy avoidants don't plan or prepare for. It just happens when someone starts to matter. Avoidants are hyper-focused on emotional distance. They've built their lives and identities around maintaining control of their inner world. So when someone gets close enough that their nervous system starts to shift, you'll notice it in how their behavior starts to align with yours. You laugh a certain way, and suddenly they do too. You use a certain phrase or gesture, and now it's showing up in their vocabulary. You play a certain kind of music, and suddenly they're sending you songs in that genre. They don't announce that they're paying attention. They just are. Because attachment for them doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in like muscle memory, and mirroring you is their subconscious way of saying, "You're part of my world now." They may not realize they're doing it. In fact, if you pointed it out, they might deny it, deflect it, or brush it off. Not because it's untrue, but because it feels too revealing, too intimate, too much. Mirroring, for an avoidant, is a risk, because it means letting your influence in. It means softening their independence, that rigid, familiar safety net, and letting your presence shape them in small but meaningful ways. That's not small for someone who's spent most of their life protecting themselves from enmeshment, from loss of identity, from the fear of being swallowed up by another person's needs or expectations. So when they start to align with your patterns, when you start to hear your own language in their mouth, when they start liking what you like, caring about what you care about, that's not just attachment. That's evidence of emotional investment. You might notice it gradually. Maybe they start dressing a little differently. Nothing drastic, just something that echoes your style or complements your energy. Maybe they start referencing things you've said, quoting you in casual conversation as if your voice has become part of their internal monologue. Maybe they start anticipating your needs, not because they're trying to be perfect, but because they've internalized how you move, what you value, how you operate. That mirroring is not manipulation. It's not game playing. It's nervous system alignment. It's a relationship forming underneath all the fear, one micro movement at a time. What's so tender and heartbreaking is that avoidants often don't even realize they're letting this happen. They've spent so long keeping people at arm's length that when someone gets close enough to influence them, it's both terrifying and comforting. And you might not always get consistent behavior. You'll see mirroring one week and distance the next. That doesn't mean the attachment disappeared. It means they're trying to regulate it. They're scared of losing themselves, so they pull back. Then they miss you. Then they move closer. And in that dance, if you're not careful, you might confuse the pulling away as rejection and miss the fact that even in distance, they still carry pieces of you. Mirroring is intimacy in disguise. It's how the avoidant lets you in without announcing it. It's how they say you matter without having to risk the language they don't trust. And it's how they begin to loosen their grip on emotional isolation. Because suddenly, you're not just someone they like. You're someone they're becoming intertwined with, not in a codependent way, in a human way, in a way that says, I see you, I respect you, and something about being around you makes me want to evolve. You can't force it. You can't ask for it. And if you demand to be mirrored, it will only trigger their fear. But if you watch closely, without pressuring, without overanalyzing, you'll see it. In the way they shift, in the way they begin to embody pieces of you, in the way they carry your voice even when you're not in the room. Because once an avoidant begins to mirror you, they're no longer just protecting themselves, they're allowing themselves to bond. Avoidants live in the illusion of control. That's their safe place. That's their armor. They convince themselves that they don't need anyone, that they're better off alone, that dependency is weakness, and intimacy is a trap. They build entire lives around that belief. Relationships kept at arm's length, emotional needs buried under routines and logic, and a constant internal voice whispering, don't get too close, you'll get hurt, or worse, you'll lose yourself. But here's the truth they don't speak out loud. Avoidants do fear losing you. Deeply, intensely. But that fear is wrapped in layers of denial, shame, and emotional self-protection. It doesn't come out in the form of desperate pleas or long, heartfelt conversations. It comes out sideways. It's hidden in the tension of their silence, the hesitation in their eyes, the way they suddenly show up just as you're starting to pull back. They can't say it, not because they don't feel it, but because saying it would mean surrendering their shield. It would mean admitting they care, that they need, that they are human. And for an avoidant, that's terrifying. Vulnerability has always equaled risk. To admit fear of loss is to admit emotional dependence. And for someone who has survived by being self-contained, who has protected themselves from emotional chaos by staying distant, that feels like the equivalent of stepping off a cliff with no safety net. So instead, they do something else. They try to maintain connection in quiet, nonverbal ways. They keep you around, even if it's in confusing patterns. They linger, they watch, they send small signals, and when they sense you slipping away, they act, often awkwardly, often inconsistently, but they act. You'll see it when you go quiet, and they reach out just a little too quickly. You'll see it when you start to emotionally detach and they suddenly want to talk, though they rarely say what they mean. You'll see it when they bring up memories, ask you how you've been, send something small, a song, a meme, a casual inside joke, like a breadcrumb trail back to closeness. They won't say, I'm scared of losing you, but their behavior will scream it. That delayed text that arrives after hours of silence, that wasn't casual. That was them watching you slip away and panicking just enough to do something about it, even if it's subtle, even if it's not what you need, even if it arrives too late or too messy. That panic is real. That's fear, disguised as nonchalance. What's cruel about the avoidance fear of loss is that it's often buried under their very own walls. They'll miss you while convincing themselves they don't. They'll ache in your absence while convincing themselves it's for the best. They'll long for closeness while replaying every reason why distance is safer. And so they suffer, quietly, alone. They won't beg you to stay. Begging feels humiliating. They won't chase you. Chasing feels like losing. But they will make themselves known in ways they hope you'll catch. They'll stay just present enough not to disappear, and just distant enough to preserve their sense of emotional safety. It's a contradiction that makes loving them confusing, but once you understand the mechanics of it, you see what's underneath. A person desperately trying to love without losing control. Sometimes their fear of losing you becomes visible in defensiveness. You mention your boundaries or start pulling your energy back, and suddenly they criticize or withdraw first, not because they don't care, but because if they convince themselves they've rejected you before you rejected them, the loss feels less painful. It's an emotional preemptive strike, a way to dull the blow. They push you away and then sit in the aftermath wondering if they've gone too far, wondering if you'll come back. And if you do, they'll pretend they're unfazed, but inside it's relief. The kind of relief that comes when the thing they won't admit they fear didn't happen. Yet. What makes all of this harder is that they often punish themselves in silence. They don't know how to say, "I miss you." So instead, they create stories in their mind about why you were going to leave anyway. They build defenses even while grieving. And sometimes they'll provoke conflict just to prove their narrative right, that closeness doesn't last, that love always fades, that eventually people leave. But underneath it all is a truth they can't bring themselves to say, that your presence matters, that your love reached parts of them they didn't even know were shut down, that they've started to build their internal world with you in it, and the thought of you being gone is unbearable, even if they never show it on their face.